Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Again, welcome to this week's office hours for ESG and ESG CV. My name is Helena Emanalo, and I am today's moderator. If you are just joining us, please go to the chat and introduce yourself with your name and the region you represent. As a reminder, this office hours session is being recorded for public record. A copy of the slide deck and recording will be emailed to all attendees. Next slide. All questions must be submitted in the chat box. Please type your question into the chat box. The team will read your questions out loud at the end of the presentation and will provide answers if possible throughout the presentation. All questions and answers entered into the chat box will be recorded as part of the public record. Alongside our presenters, we also have several HCD staff, including ESG representatives, ESG CV grant administrators, and other consultants who are able to answer questions during the Q&A session. Next slide, please. For today's agenda, we have ESG CV updates, office hours updates, upcoming trainings, ESG and ESG CV Q&A, and today's Spotlight Series presentation, California HCD ESG CV training series. LaQuantia, is Sarah here? Okay, next slide, please. So for the ESG updates, the 2021 contracts, avoid receiving STD 209s and reimbursement delays. All 2021 contracts are managed in eCivis. All requests for funds must be submitted through eCivis by clicking the Financial Report tab. Please do not email these requests to your representative. Every request for funds must also include a completed detailed expense report. HCD is conducting mini monitoring for every reimbursement request. This will include anywhere from 3 to 4 line items chosen by your HCD representative, and will also include complete client files if requesting reimbursement for rapid rehousing and/or homelessness prevention expenses. As a reminder, all supporting documentation must be redacted and submitted through the secure SharePoint site. Please do not upload the documentation in eCivis. Be sure to have your supporting documentation ready to submit when requested from your HCD representative. Next slide, please. For 2022 applications, the ESG team is currently reviewing the balance of state competitive applications. All COC AE applications have been reviewed. All BOS non-competitive applications have been reviewed. ESG reps have sent all applications that need corrections back to draft. If you need help or clarification on corrections, please reach out to esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov. As a reminder, you cannot add additional people from your organization to view the application award until a contract has been executed. Next slide, please. For all ESG policy documents, you can use the resources found below. Next slide, please. Our ESG team representatives are Diane Prado, Giovanni Martinez, Tuesday Kuhl, and Anthony Zepeda. Please reach out to your ESG representative listed above or contact us at esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov. And for ESG CV updates, reminders for performance milestones, all program funds for projects, street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention must be expended by September 30th, 2023. All funds for HMIS and administrative costs shall be expended by October 31st, 2023. And final requests for funds must be submitted to the department by November 15th, 2023. Next slide, please. Upcoming office hours topics. On February 8th, there will be the proper financial backup source documentation. The 15th, homeless eligibility policy. The 22nd, street outreach policy and eligibility documentation. And on March 1st, emergency shelter policy and eligibility documentation. Please refer to the training site to register for office hours. And for previous office hours recordings, you can click the link on this page. Next slide, please. So we have some very informative trainings coming up this month, and I encourage you all to register if you can. On February 3rd, the VAWA Community Workshop series will provide attendees with an overview of how VAWA interacts with ESG. On February 7th, the Effective Non-Congregate Shelter Session 1 will provide an overview of non-congregate shelter program design and emerging best practices. And the links to register can be found on this page. Next slide, please. On February 7th, California HCD and COC will provide an overview of California HCD's coordination strategy and discuss what COCs can expect as this coordination effort is implemented. Participants will understand the federal coordination requirements and how they are incorporated into California HCD's overall approach. On February 10th, there will be a training called Developing a Diverse Organization. It will go over recruitment, hiring, and retention. And this series will help you build your toolkit for diversity and inclusion in recruitment and hiring while focusing on establishing targets, reaching new audiences, working against bias, and building trust so that all staff feel a sense of belonging. Next slide, please. On February 14th, we have the non-effective congregate shelter series. Session 2 will go over prioritization for non-congregate shelter. How does a community create an equitable process to prioritize individuals for limited non-congregate shelter? And session 3 will be on February 21st and will highlight funding and community considerations for ongoing non-congregate shelter. And if you are interested, you can use the links provided to register. Next slide, thank you. These are the COVID response resources. Please use these links. Next slide. And we also have monkeypox resources and fact sheets that you can use as well. Next slide. Please use these links on this page for ESG and TA resources. Any questions? Okay, no questions at this time. Next slide, please. If you have any questions, any further questions, please contact us for annual ESG. Please reach out to your ESG representative or ESG NOFA at hcd.ca.gov. And for ESG CV, please reach out to your grant administrator. And now I will hand it over to our very own Kristen Delkamp and Erin Rutherford for today's Spotlight Series presentation on HUD monitoring of California HCD and how it's shaping our 2023 work.
Thank you very much, Helena. Next slide, please. So, hi everyone. My name is Kristen Delkamp, and my pronouns are she, hers. Today, my colleague Erin Rutherford and I are going to take you through a look at the monitoring that HUD did on HCD's ESG and ESG-CV programs last year, and more specifically, how it will affect monitoring and training for subrecipients. Before we jump into how HUD's monitoring will shape our work on ESG and ESG-CV, let me provide a quick overview of the monitoring process that HCD has been going through with HUD. In July 2022, HCD was notified that HUD would be monitoring ESG and ESG-CV. Monitoring included California HCD fiscal and administrative processes, 5 subrecipients' financial and client files, written standards, policy, and procedure review. HUD responded with their results in November 2022, and in January 2023, HCD completed a response to HUD to address findings and concerns. Next slide, please. Over the next few slides, we will show how HUD's monitoring has or will roll down to sub and subrecipients in 4 areas: monitoring, policies and procedures, past trainings, and future trainings. Next slide, please. The first area that HUD called to our attention is around monitoring. Here is what they had to say. The state did not provide documentation showing it has completed evaluations or considered risk factors of its ESG CV recipients for the purpose of determining appropriate subrecipient monitoring scopes and strategies. The first area of response from HCD is around the monitoring that we have done and will continue to do with subrecipients. As of today, 25 ESG CV subrecipients have already begun to be monitored or completed their monitoring. Another 17 are scheduled to begin monitoring by July. As a reminder, subrecipients should also be monitoring their own subs, and HCD looks for evidence of this during monitoring. HCD is also in the process of completing a monitoring policy for both ESG and ESG-CV, which will be complete by the end of February. That document will be shared widely once completed. If you are unfamiliar with either HUD monitoring of subs or monitoring of subs, we have a number of past trainings that you'll be able to access directly from the presentation when it's emailed out to you. One area in particular with monitoring was around client files being incomplete. In response to this, California HCD is creating a series of client file checklists for each component. On April 19th, we will hold a special spotlight series so that those checklists can be rolled out to all of you. Next slide, please. The next area of focus is around rapid rehousing, and more specifically, project files. Here is HUD's statement. The grantee and its subrecipients did not maintain and follow written intake procedures to ensure and document that each program participant who received rapid rehousing assistance was eligible based on meeting specific criteria and did not document services and assistance provided. Where we will look for this in monitoring is in the following areas. We want to see documentation of homelessness status in every file. Executed and legally binding written leases between tenant and landlord must be in the files. Also in the files should be executed rental assistance agreements between the subrecipients and the property owner. We'll need to see that the unit meets or surpasses the ESG minimum habitability standards threshold. Rent reasonableness and fair market rent should be included in the documentation, and there needs to be evidence of proof of payment for services rendered to clients. In response to this finding, HCD is creating a rapid rehousing client file checklist, which, as mentioned previously, will be rolled out in April 2023. We have also in the last year created an ESG rapid rehousing manual and a checklist, both of which are linked from the presentation to HCD's website. There have been a number of past trainings about rapid rehousing, and those will be accessible to you on the slides when they're sent. Finally, since this is such a big topic, we have many trainings coming over the next few months through our Office Hours Spotlight series to help satisfy the HUD's requirements. These include rapid rehousing requirements on 3.8, client file checklist on 4.19, HCD rapid rehousing policy on 3.22, leases habitability and lead on 4.23, rental assistance agreements on 5.3, rent reasonableness and fair market rent for rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention on 5.10, and eligibility documentation for rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention on 5.24. Next slide, please. Another area of focus is income evaluation and eligibility. HUD's letter stated the grantee and its subrecipients did not consistently conduct initial evaluations to determine eligibility and the need for rapid rehousing assistance, and did not consistently conduct reevaluations for rapid rehousing assistance. Please remember that documentation of homelessness status is always required for rapid rehousing. This will be reinforced by the client filed checklist set to roll out in April 2023. There has been only one past training session around income evaluation, and that was the coffee and calculator session in which we learned how to use HUD CPD income calculator. You will receive the link in our welcome to review this brief 45-minute training. For upcoming trainings, we will have the client file checklist on 419 and income evaluation and reevaluation on 531. Just click the links in the presentation to register if you're not already registered for office hours. Next slide, please. An additional area for improvement that HUD pointed out was around housing stability plans. The grantee and its subrecipients did not consistently document in the program participant files the housing stability plan or evidence of connecting program participants to mainstream and other resources to assist with obtaining and retaining permanent housing after ESG assistance ends. So as a reminder, a housing stability plan is required for all participants receiving rapid rehousing or homelessness prevention assistance. We will be looking for these plans when we monitor subrecipients, and subs should also be providing the plans while being monitored by their subrecipients. We've had a number of past trainings that we invite you to watch that provide the basis for housing stability plans. And please make note of the upcoming Spotlight Series training on March 29th, which will focus solely on housing stability planning. And now I'm going to turn it over to my fellow grant administrator, Erin Rutherford.
Thanks, Kristen. So the next finding that HUD identified in the monitoring review with HCD is in regards to requirements for the Violence Against Women Act, or otherwise known as VAWA. HUD found that the subrecipients did not include the required VAWA provisions in their rental assistance agreements and leases. And there was also a lack of evidence that the VAWA notice and the certification form were provided to clients. Just as a reminder, VAWA lease addendum is always required for clients who move into housing with the assistance of ESG-CV, and the VAWA notice of occupancy rights is required each time an applicant applies for ESG-CV rental assistance. You can refer to HCD's VAWA compliance policy on their website, and a sample VAWA lease addendum and notice of occupancy rights is also available online. And to learn more, you can review HUD's past training on VAWA housing protections for ESG programs. And as we mentioned a few minutes ago, you can also register to attend this Friday's upcoming VAWA community workshop that'll be presented by the ICF Training and Technical Assistance team. Next slide, Taylor. Thank you. All right, now moving on to habitability standards. So HUD found a lack of evidence that an ESG-CV temporary emergency shelter met sanitation standards, and also that they found a lack of evidence that that shelter was not subject to those requirements due to a determination by the state or local health officials of the need for such shelters during COVID. As a reminder, both shelters and housing units have to meet habitability standards. There must be a form on file that documents the shelter or the rental unit meets habitability standards. And for more information, you can refer to HCD's policy on ESG minimum habitability standards for shelter and housing, which is on their website. And you can also review the recording of a training that HCD sponsored back on April 22nd on habitability standards. And we're also going to be having more trainings to discuss habitability in depth going forward. You can register for those trainings to learn more about emergency shelter habitability on April 12th, and then rental unit habitability on April 26th. Next slide. Thank you, Taylor. So HUD also identified that HCD and its subrecipients did not consistently document compliance with requirements for lead-based paint. Lead paint requirements can vary depending on things such as the age of the unit, whether there's a child under the age of 6, or if there's a pregnant person in the home. Documents for compliance with lead-based requirements may include a lead screening worksheet, an inspection report, disclosure forms, and/or evidence that the household was provided with a pamphlet for Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. HCD is currently developing a lead paint policy that should be available by the end of the month, so we don't have something to refer you to today, but that will be coming. And while we don't have any past trainings to offer, we do encourage you to sign up for the training that we're doing on April 16th, where we will be discussing lead paint requirements. Next slide. Okay, now I'm going to cover some of the trends that HCD has seen in their monitoring of ESG subrecipients. A lot of it is similar things that HUD found, for HCD, but HCD is also looking a little more in depth for their subrecipients in some projects like street outreach, emergency shelter. So these are some of the trends we've seen for monitoring the California ESG CV recipients. So for street outreach and emergency shelter projects, we've seen some inconsistencies in how projects document homeless status. So as a reminder, clients served under street outreach or emergency shelter still have to have verification of homelessness on record. We've also found a lack of services have been documented in client files, things like proof of payment, progress notes, or lists of services provided has not been in client files. So please make sure that all services provided to the client under ESG CV are properly documented. There's also been a lack of evidence that subrecipients are adhering to HCD's duplication of benefits policy. We've seen some subrecipients have not had their own DOB procedures, or they're not showing documentation that a DOB analysis was conducted. HCD's website does have a DOB policy, and it also has some sample DOB forms. So I encourage you to review those. And there's also a sample DOB checklist that HUD has published online that you can use as well. We've also noticed that part of the ESG CV notice that includes guidance on providing housing and service without prerequisite requirements, such as the client having to meet certain conditions in order to get or continue receiving services, is not being followed. Examples of prerequisite requirements that we've seen are having clients agree to home visits or in-person meetings, requiring clients to do job search, requiring clients to save money or contribute to a savings account, requiring them to attend classes. So it's just important to remember that if your community has written standards or policies in place that require these things, then those written standards or policies and procedures need to be updated to reflect what the ESG CV notice says around requiring prerequisite activities. In regards to financial management, when doing the financial review for HCD's ESG CV subrecipients, we've noticed a lack of sufficient backup documentation on file. Things such as not classifying expenditures by ESG component on the general ledger. So for example, you would classify expenditures according to street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, etc. We've seen that as an issue. We've seen a lack of proof of payment, missing or unsigned timesheets, missing payroll reports, and lack of procurement records. Those have all been a common thing. One of the upcoming Spotlight series will be on acceptable forms of backup documentation. So please attend that if you're able to, or watch the recording when it gets sent out. And we also encourage your subrecipients to attend that presentation so that they are aware of what documentation they need to have on file, as an ESG CV subrecipient. And then lastly, we've noticed a lack of written standards and policies and procedures around ESG CV. Some of the written standards are missing certain requirements that are outlined in the ESG regulations. So I encourage you all to review the ESG regulations online around written standards so that you're aware of what has to be included. There's also been a lack of ESG policies and procedures at the subrecipient level. Some subrecipients have told HCD that their COC's ESG written standards are their ESG policies and procedures. But please note that policies and procedures are different than written standards. Policies and procedures would outline how the subrecipient operates the ESG program. So it may include specific internal procedures for how you do intake, how payment requests are made, how services are documented. That is typically a separate document from the written standards. So just note that when HCD is doing their monitoring, if a subrecipient does not have separate policies and procedures from their written standards, that's gonna come up on the final monitoring report. So something, if you haven't been monitored yet, you might want to start thinking about and getting that together. All right, next slide. And now we have our Q&A session, so we can open it up for any questions that people might have. If there's anything we can't answer today, then we'll definitely follow up with a response later on, but just want to open it up.
And I don't see anything in the chat yet, Erin. We have a question from Michael Acevedo that says, can you clarify what you mean by different policies and procedures?
So Michael, just if you want to come off mute, but just confirm, are you asking about the difference between written standards and policies and procedures?
Yeah, I think I misunderstood that difference.
Sure, yeah. So and I can put a couple links in the chat in just a second, but your policies and procedures are usually how you do your program operations. So, how intake might be conducted, what types of, documentation you have to collect, how you make financial purchases, how those are approved. It's kind of the day-to-day operating procedures of your program, whereas written standards, there's specific requirements that HUD has identified for what goes into written standards. And I'm gonna give you the link to that right now. So if you go to the link I just dropped in the chat, that will take you to what the regulations are around ESG written standards. So it gives you a bulleted list of, I think, about 10 or 11 different items that indicates what you have to have in your written standards. So if after reviewing that, if anyone, or Michael, if you have extra questions about, clarification, please reach out and let us know.
Thank you.
And I see your question that you have a combined rapid rehousing manual for both ESG and COC funded programs. Should they be separated going forward? They don't necessarily have to be separated, but that manual needs to indicate, what requirements apply to ESG. Sometimes the requirements for ESG and COC can be different depending on what type of project is being funded. So I would just make sure that any differences between, rapid rehousing assistance are clarified, evaluations, things like that. So it may make sense for you to have kind of separate ESG and COC sections that are in that manual. Any other questions?
I don't see any more in the chat right now. Anyone want to unmute yourselves and ask a question? Of course, we don't want to just keep you hanging around if we don't have to.
Sure. Thanks, LaQuantia. I will say that LaQuantia is super fast at sending the follow-up emails. So all of the links, that have been in our presentation today, you will get access to all of that. So if there's, any other questions that you all have of links that you need or things you can't find, please just reach out and let us know.
Well, thank you, Kristen and Erin, for letting us know how this next year is going to be shaped based on HUD's monitoring. As usual, there will be a quick survey after you close out your session or the session is closed out today. Look for your follow-up materials, as Erin has stated. They will be to you within the next day or so. And we look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a great week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.